They told us we came from Africa in chains, that we were stolen, stripped of our names, our language, our history, and dumped into a foreign land as cargo. But what if I told you that was only part of the story? What if I told you that a black man's DNA, discovered by accident, completely shattered that narrative? His name was Albert Perry, and when scientists tested his Y chromosome, they found something so ancient, so impossible, it sent shockwaves through the genetic community. His DNA didn't match any other group on Earth, not Native American, not European, not even other African lineages. It was older, hundreds of thousands of years older. Older than the pyramids, older than written language, older than modern humans themselves. And the most shocking part? It was discovered in a black man living in America. So ask yourself, if Albert Perry's DNA is older than any known human lineage in the Americas, what are they hiding? History is not written by those who tell the truth. It's written by those who own the pen, and for over 400 years the pen has never been in our hands. They told us our story began on slave ships. They told us we were rootless, voiceless, nameless. They told us we had no past, only pain. But what they never told us is that the truth was in our blood all along. From the moment the first Europeans set foot in the Americas, they began rewriting the past. They silenced the voices of the black indigenous tribes they encountered. They burned villages. They renamed rivers. They erased nations. Because if the world knew the truth, that black people were already here, long before Columbus, then the entire system of conquest, colonization, and control would fall apart. So they replaced history with myth. They taught our children that we were nothing but former slaves. They told us our ancestors came from Africa, with no civilization, no science, no sovereignty. They said we were discovered, as if we didn't already exist. But the truth has a funny way of surviving. It hides in places they can't reach, in songs, in stories, in stone carvings, and now in science. For years, mainstream genetic studies avoided African American DNA. They studied European lineages, they studied Asian migrations, they traced the movements of Neanderthals and ancient Nordic tribes, but they rarely touched African Americans. Why? Because if they ever studied us deeply, if they ever cracked open the code of our DNA, they'd find something terrifying. Not just a connection to Africa, but to something even older. Something that didn't fit into their timeline. Something that couldn't be explained by slavery. They would find that we didn't just come from Africa, we came from the beginning. And in 2013, when scientists stumbled upon the DNA of Albert Perry, a man who had passed away in quiet obscurity, they weren't ready for what they found. They expected to see the usual ancestry breakdown. Instead, they found a genetic anomaly so ancient, so powerful, that it threatened to rewrite human history, starting with the Americas. And what did they do? They didn't announce it to the world. They didn't put it on the news. They didn't make it required reading in classrooms. They buried it, tucked away in scientific journals, labeled it an outlier, filed it under further research needed. But we're not outliers. We're not accidents. We're not invisible. We are the origin they've been trying to hide. And now, the truth is rising. Albert Perry wasn't famous. He didn't write books. He didn't lead revolutions. He wasn't the subject of documentaries or celebrated by scholars. He lived a quiet life in South Carolina, in a world that told him his past began in slavery and ended in struggle. But what Albert Perry didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that his body carried a secret older than civilization itself. It all began after his death. One of his relatives submitted a DNA sample to a commercial genetic testing company as part of a family tree project. The goal? To learn about their African roots, the usual migration stories, maybe some tribal connections, and the typical breakdown most African Americans get. But what the scientists found was something they couldn't explain. Albert Perry's Y chromosome, the genetic strand passed from father to son, generation after generation, didn't match anything in their global database. Not a single known lineage, not from Africa, not from Europe, not from Asia, not from anywhere. It wasn't just rare, it was unprecedented. His Y chromosome was so genetically distinct, so ancient, that it didn't even fall on the modern human family tree. It stood alone, like a towering monolith of forgotten history. How old was it? Over 338,000 years. That's older than the oldest known Homo sapiens fossils. Older than anything science had ever traced in the human genome. Older than the so-called Y chromosomal Adam, the theoretical common ancestor of all living men. Let that sink in. Albert Perry, a black man from America, carried a Y chromosome, older than any known human being on the planet. He wasn't just part of history, he predated it. And here's what really sent shockwaves through the scientific community. He wasn't from an isolated tribe in the heart of Africa. He wasn't from an untouched island with ancient DNA. He was from America, from the very land they told us we came to in chains. Albert Perry's DNA revealed something no one wanted to admit, that the oldest known human paternal lineage wasn't found in a cave, or a desert, or a jungle. It was found in a descendant of enslaved Africans living in the United States. So ask yourself, how did this man, in a country built on stolen land and broken identity, come to possess the oldest Y chromosome ever discovered? It wasn't luck. It wasn't random. It was legacy. It was survival. It was truth, hidden in the one place they never thought to look. A black man in America. And from that moment forward, science could no longer pretend that the African-American story began in 1619. Because Albert Perry's blood proved otherwise. The Y chromosome is more than just a strand of DNA. It's a time capsule, passed directly from father to son for thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. It doesn't mix or dilute like other DNA, it preserves. Which means if your ancestor walked this earth 10 generations ago, his Y chromosome is still walking with you. Now imagine this. Scientists open that time capsule, and what they find inside is older than any human being they've ever studied. That's exactly what happened with Albert Perry. His Y chromosome didn't just challenge scientific models, it destroyed them, because it didn't fit the known human family tree. It didn't trace back to Y chromosomal Adam, the man science says was the father of all living men, who supposedly lived about 200,000 years ago. Perry's Y chromosome predated that by over 100,000 years. How is that even possible? The answer, it shouldn't be. And that's why the scientific world froze. His DNA didn't belong to the typical haplogroups found in modern African, European, or Native American populations. It belonged to a newly discovered lineage called a 00, something so rare, so ancient, that scientists had never seen it in a living person before. Most people's Y-DNA belongs to lineages that branched off long after modern humans appeared. But Perry's Y-DNA came from a branch before the modern branches even existed. It was like finding the foundation stone of a skyscraper, buried deep, forgotten, but still supporting everything built on top of it. And here's where it gets even more mind-blowing. This ancient A00 lineage wasn't found in a remote African tribe. It was found in South Carolina, in a man whose ancestors had likely lived in America for generations. This means one of two things. Either his ancient ancestors migrated to America long before Columbus, before Native Americans, before written history, or that the American continent once held populations carrying this ancient African lineage. Populations that were erased, reclassified, or renamed after colonization. Both possibilities shatter the accepted history of how humans spread across the earth. It challenges the Bering Strait theory. It challenges the idea that black people only arrived here through slavery. It challenges every textbook that places black presence in America after 1492. And once again, the institutions didn't want to talk about it. They labeled the discovery interesting. They hid it in academic jargon. They made no effort to share it with the communities it most affected, African Americans. But here's the truth. Albert Perry's Y chromosome is proof that black people are not just part of the human story. We are the beginning of it. We are not descendants of slaves who were brought here. We are descendants of the first men, the first navigators, the first Americans, whose blood still pulses through the bodies of millions today. And once you understand that, everything changes. Albert Perry's Y chromosome didn't just change the story of humanity. It reopened a chapter that had been violently erased from American soil, the story of the original black civilizations of the Americas. Because if a man in South Carolina held the oldest known human paternal DNA, then what if he wasn't the exception? What if he was a remnant, a surviving piece of a black presence that stretched across this land long before the arrival of Columbus, the slave ships, or the rewriting of history? Let's follow the blood trail, and let's start where they hoped we'd never look. In the dirt. Archaeologists have long discovered ancient remains in the Americas that defy conventional narratives. Burial mounds in the Mississippi Valley, sacred temples in Georgia and Alabama, giant stone heads in Mexico, and scattered among those sites are bones. Bones that tell a silent story. Because when DNA testing was performed on some of these ancient remains, especially in places like South Carolina, Mexico, and the Caribbean, fragments of African genetic markers appeared. Not modern African, not post-slavery African, ancient African darted. The same markers found in isolated populations in Cameroon and other regions of West Africa. The same markers traced in Perry's A00 lineage were quietly detected in American soil. Of course, these findings were buried in obscure journals, labeled as unexpected admixture or anomalous haplotypes, the kind of language that hides truth behind technical terms. But the implications were clear. There were people in the Americas, thousands of years ago, who carried ancient African DNA, and that aligns perfectly with what has been whispered by black elders for centuries, that we didn't all come from Africa in chains. Some of us were already here, building, worshipping, governing. Look at the Olmecs, an ancient civilization in Mesoamerica known for their colossal stone heads, their features, full lips, broad noses, locked hair, dark skin. They match no Native American tribes of today, but they mirror the features of modern black people. Now consider the Washita Nation, a black indigenous group that occupied vast portions of North America, long before the US existed. They built mound cities, developed calendars, practiced spiritual science, and left behind oral traditions that speak of African ancestry and global trade, or the Yamasee of Georgia and South Carolina, whose dark skin, tribal rituals, and bloodlines were so African that early European colonizers mistook them for runaway slaves. But they weren't runaways. They were foundations. And guess what region the Yamasee once ruled? The same region where Albert Perry lived. Coincidence, or genetic memory echoing from the earth? His ancient Y chromosome wasn't just a quirk of nature. It was a living fossil, a survivor of a lost world that had been covered up, colonized, renamed, and forgotten. But DNA doesn't forget. It whispers through bone. It lingers in the blood, and it tells the truth that monuments and museums refuse to speak. That black people were not just brought to this land. We were born on it. He wasn't the beginning. He was the survivor, the silent echo of a bloodline they couldn't fully wipe out. Proof that we were already here, and that the land we walk on today, it remembers us. Albert Perry's DNA didn't just raise questions, it raised alarms. Because when scientists realized his Y chromosome was over 338,000 years old, they didn't throw a press conference. They didn't rewrite the textbooks. They didn't change the timeline of human migration. They panicked. Why? Because his DNA didn't just expand human history. It exposed how much of it had been erased. And long before the first European flag was planted, long before the word slave was ever used, we were already here, writing, building, remembering. We've been told one version of the story our entire lives, that black people came to America in chains, that we were stolen, sold, shipped across the Atlantic like cattle, that we had no history in this land before slavery. But what if that's a half-truth? What if they erased the other half? Because the moment you accept that Albert Perry's Y chromosome, the oldest in human history, was found in a black man from America, you have to ask the question they